So many great writers and thinkers over the age. How did they get so smart? People like John Locke, Virginia Woolf, Oscar Wilde, Leonardo da Vinci, Thoreau, and Octavia Butler all had something in common. They all used a certain tool to develop their thoughts and writings that were so good that to this day they're still being remembered. I talk about this tool in an interview I had with Andrea Hylen. I just had to clip this in and put a copy here on my YouTube channel because I'm so passionate about this subject. So keep watching to see the interview.
So, welcome everyone to Carving a New Path. My name is Andrea Hylen, and I am the host of this show. So, if you have never listened to the show, here's just a brief description. It was really started in 2020 as a response to all the change that people were experiencing. And I wanted to invite guests who had listened to their inner voice and birthed new ways of being in the world and who had tools, resources, ideas of how they navigate it. And really, the shows have continued with some of the people are repeat guests where we're talking about all kinds of different things. So, Sofia Wren is here today. And Sofia is, hi, Sofia.
Hello,
Great
I'm
to
so
see you.
excited today.
So let me just tell, in case anyone hasn't listened to the shows, and we do talk about writing and organizing and creativity and different things in the world. Sophia helps sensitive people write for a book or business so that they can serve a wider audience. Sophia has pursued a passion for publishing online and in books for over 20 years. For 10 years, she's run her own business, learning how to sell and connect with writing. And she now focuses on entrepreneurs and writers ready to hone their writing, reach the people they are here to serve, and feel the love. And I'm excited because I've hired Sophia this year to help me bring my book into the world. So I'm grateful for the collaboration, for you, and just all of your talents and skills, Sophia.
Likewise, I love collaborating with you on writing and things too, for sure.
Yeah, it's all good. So now I'm drawing a blank. Okay, commonplace. Is it just called commonplace, or is there a longer word for it?
Yeah, well, commonplace books.
Commonplace books. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is learning from past thinkers and what they did, and specifically about taking notes and learning. Because one of the ways actually that I'm learning from Sophia right now is in her digital organization membership, which I am like so on fire, Sophia. I have to tell you from of like this morning, I had these two ideas of things I want to write, and I'm in the middle of like I was in the middle of preparing a talk. I've like got some other things going on, and all of a sudden these two new ideas popped. I was like, oh my gosh, I could write some blogs about these. So I went right to Obsidian, where you had or are teaching us, and I was just like, put them in there. And I thought, all right, I'm going to keep learning from Sophia about taking notes and being able to find things and learning, which is actually what is leading us to this conversation
Yeah.
because you were fascinated by commonplace books. And let's just start with what is commonplace book?
Yeah, totally. So, and just to piggyback off of what you said, yeah, ideas themselves are so valuable, to those of us who like writing and creativity and contributing to the world and having something cool to say. I mean, our ideas are so priceless. And then finding them is another thing, or making sure that that fire we had this morning stays in 2 weeks when we actually have time to go write the blog post, that gaps occur in our ability to find things or remember things. And we didn't used to have all the tools we have today, right? So we have some new tools we can use. We were just talking about Obsidian as a new software that's out now, that I really love. But people used to try to do something before we had computers. We have had great thinkers and writers for centuries. And so what did they do? So commonplace books are a tradition that people have had for thousands of years as a way to combat those issues with finding ideas and the gaps that we have. And basically, the idea of it is we're taking things that were scattered all over the place in different books from different thinkers or thoughts, different ideas, and we're bringing them all together in one common place. So that's why it's called a commonplace book, because that's going to be the commonplace for your
Oh, okay. Oh,
yeah.
clever,
Yeah,
clever.
right.
Okay.
Right. Once
Yeah.
you know, when you're like, oh, that makes sense. But it also can be a verb that you commonplace things
Mm.
in this book. So people would have books, that was the technology that we had in the past, right? It was books was our ultimate pinnacle of technology. And this was kind of taking it to the next level. So if somebody is a reader, a learner, a thinker, and they're learning from other people who've come before, other people in their environment, they can bring in their favorite or most meaningful passages and information into a book so that it's a collection of all of like their favorite little pieces. So instead of needing to wander around an entire library or write inside of those books, you would be writing in your own book pieces of those. And you could either just kind of be stark, like sticking to the facts, sticking to the quote, or you can add your own thoughts on top of those. And that's what most people did, is that they kind of would be in conversation with what their reading was in these little books. And then what really brought this to the next level for me is because I was thinking, okay, great. People are copying poems and things into another book. I guess that's kind of cool, but it's a little bit dull. But when I started to realize, somebody explained it to me that they wouldn't just copy it once, but they would be rereading. They would be adding notes on top of their notes. Then they might be copying that again into another book and with a new eye and a new purpose. And these could be very targeted to a topic, or they could be about everything. But it really was this sort of idea that there's all this movement of ideas from one place to another, and then maybe it comes up in conversation with somebody else, and maybe they end up writing about it in their journal, in their commonplace book, and it kind of is part of this really cool movement and dialogue of ideas when you're alone, but also with others. So once I sort of got that idea down, that really, really excited me. And there was a really cool quote. I realized that when I read this quote, and this is from the director of the Harvard Library, former director of the Harvard Library, Robert Darnton, who said, unlike modern readers who follow the flow of a narrative from beginning to end, early modern Englishmen read in fits and starts and jumped from book to book. They broke texts into fragments and assembled them into new patterns by transcribing them in different sections of their notebooks. Then they reread the copies and rearranged the patterns while adding more excerpts. Reading and writing were therefore inseparable activities. They belonged to a continuous effort to make sense of things, for the world was full of signs. You could read your way through it, and by keeping an account of your readings, you made a book of your own, one stamped with your personality. And I just thought that was so cool. What do you think?
Yeah, I like my mind is like flashing in all kinds of ways. I mean, one, I'm thinking about how there was a time where books were like handwritten. Like there was a
Yeah.
book and then somebody sat and like that was their life was writing this book, and that's how you then passed a book on to someone else. And then this idea of uh reading. I mean, I actually do this in many ways that I usually have, like right now, I see 7 or 8 books beside my bed, and I pick them up and read them at different times. And I am kind of in a thing where I want to finish reading a book and go put it in a little free library. So I've got a little different discipline there. But I was thinking about how I'm always amazed how I'll pick up a book and decide, oh, I'm going to read 10 pages of this tonight. And I'll think, oh, that book I read this morning actually was tied in with this that I'm reading by a totally different author on a supposedly totally different topic, but they both wrote about an apple tree, and I'll be like, that's so fascinating that somebody's writing a nonfiction book and somebody's writing a novel, and both of them had an apple tree in their description.
That's
And
cool.
how that works and how that ties together. And I love like the creation of like pulling out patterns and fragments and I'll tell you, and the last piece that comes to me is lately I've been doing interviewing, having conversations with a number of different people where we're doing a series. And I've thought at times like, oh, should I just have one person and then I post every podcast of that series and then move to another? And I've decided not to do that. I've decided to have conversations, and one person, the series is once a month, and another person it's once a week. And just being curious about how someone listening is these layered conversations versus just sticking to the one
Hmm.
topic. So it just is intriguing me about all the patterns and the ways that we read and the ways that we take in information and the ways we create. Yeah. So,
Fascinating. I love it.
yeah. So, all right. I know I have some questions here for you, but I would just say, where do you want to go next with
Yeah.
this
The one thing
topic?
I'll say is I don't, I will say for anyone listening, like, I don't love like writing down quotes by hand, but
Mhm.
these days we have it so easy because we have the technology that I can, with my iPhone, I just take a picture of a book and I can just copy the passage I want to copy
Yes.
and
Yes,
paste
totally.
that into, I have my digital kind of commonplace book of sorts, my digital journal, and I can just pull that quote right in there. Or if you see something online, you can take a copy of that. And a lot of times text files are so small that you could do that for your whole life and it wouldn't take up very much space. So we have a lot of things that they didn't have,
Mhm.
but it's just this idea of but the difference is when you can collect things, but it's that extra time that they would take to really like ruminate on the things that were really important to them that I find so fascinating. John Locke really loved um, commonplace books, and he even wrote about them and created like a sample one that people could buy and fill in with their own information. He was a big proponent of the commonplace book. He said, "We are of the ruminating kind, and it is not enough to cram ourselves with a great load of collections unless we chew them over again. Books will not give us strength and nourishment," he said. So he had this sort of that philosophy, and then Tolstoy, the famous writer of War and Peace and Anna Karenina, and I can say more about him in a little while, but he basically had a book that he ended up publishing for the public that was his commonplace book, and he was in a practice of every day digesting a page, and he went through it multiple times over 15 years, and he put out three different versions where he was updating it each time, like in his own, as a part of his own practice. And so it's sort of this like kind of, we're digesting, we're nibbling through, and that kind of brings to the questions of like, what is worth it to you to really spend that time on is going to be different. And that's why it was very personal, that no one, it's not about somebody telling you, oh, well, you should like read all of these, but you get to choose for yourself. Like for instance, like when I was looking at Tolstoy's um works, and that quote from John Locke came from his commonplace book. So I just selected that like passage, like, oh, that's worthy of like me remembering. So like let me add it to my notes for this podcast. So just like that, like pulling things that resonate with you and then going back over it later. You know what I'm saying? And um it can be, yeah, it can be a nice practice for you, and again you get to have your own choice and what you would put your energy into studying or referring back to for inspiration, and it could be your own words, it doesn't have to be somebody else's words. So I've been working on one of my own, um but I did want to just share for anyone who's interested just the tradition of it, because I like knowing that it's like this long tradition and who else has been having fun with it. They say the earliest example of a commonplace books is actually the part of the Bible where they have the Psalms, is
Mhm.
said to be the first commonplace book, that was a collection of things together, which I think personally, I think is like the strongest part of the Bible. That's my opinion. I think a
Mhm.
lot of people have stuff that they like in Psalms. Even some people who like are like, I can take or leave the rest of it, but like the Psalms are pretty good. I like the Seasons one or whatever, you know? So that's a commonplace book apparently. And then also the ancient Greeks and Romans used it, and it was something they discussed in the literature, and that includes the emperor, what is his name? Aurelius. This is
Uh-huh.
part of his name. Yeah, Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah.
Um, and then later on it became, these are emperors, these are really fancy people, right? But then it became the priests in
Mm.
the 8th century. Not everybody really could read or write, but those who could were probably priests, and they wanted to create sermons, so they would be collecting different passages for that and their thoughts on that in their commonplace books. And again, it might be something they refer to the next year for that time of year, that celebration. So it was kind of a niche thing for a little while, but then um, at Oxford, they taught it. So then everyone who went to Oxford was learning this. And some of the famous people were John Milton, author of Paradise Lost, Robert Burns, who wrote poetry, and John Locke, of course, like I was saying. And the Renaissance, it was very popular. And as interests me, I want to go down that rabbit hole sometime because I speak Italian, but in Italy, they actually had a practice of publishing commonplace books. So you would go and you'd buy a book that was a hodgepodge of other books, where a passage here, a passage there, here's a recipe, here's a currency exchange table, here's
Yeah.
some factoids you need to know, so it would be kind of a collection. There'd be all kinds of them. And now historians can look at those and say, hey, it just so happens that Dante's and all of these. He must have been a really big deal. So we know a lot about them because they published their commonplace books. But then, of course, people would have their own where you might take the best of what you found and collect them. And Da Vinci had a number of commonplace books. He was a big journaler.
Mhm.
And yeah, so there's all the, and they even put it into fiction. So like Sherlock Holmes, the famous detective,
Mhm.
is written as having commonplace books. In fact, he's written as having so many that each notebook has just one letter for the beginning of all of it, the things it's talking about. So he must have had a full library of 26 at least to pull
Wow.
from all of his personal encyclopedia knowledge. Um, so which is to say the stereotype is that smart people had commonplace books, right? Maybe even more than one. And then they also taught at Harvard. So Harvard, and then Thoreau and Emerson are some famous scholars from Harvard that had those. So Thoreau is known for Walden, about his stories about being out in nature, and Emerson was a big mentor of his. And then bringing it towards the modern times, Oscar Wilde also was one of those people, and he was more part of like the literary tradition where he might be reading books and then quoting from them, but also giving his thoughts about the books. And an
Mhm.
exercise that some people would do is actually, if you found something inspiring, make a fictional story about that quote or about the
Mhm.
meaning of that passage to
Mhm.
kind of digest it in another creative way. So that's what Oscar Wilde did, and that led to some of his fictional successes. Um, and then also is something that Tolstoy did as well. So, and Virginia Woolf is another famous commonplacer, and she was a big on the book, kind of her book commentary would be a part of her commonplace book. So everything she read, she would write bits of it and notes from it and keep that in one commonplace.
Mhm.
So yeah, so then there's Francis Coppola, who had his own version of it for the Godfather movie. He had a 3-ring binder where he had all of his ideas about the original book that he based it on. He basically read the book, wrote notes in the margins, and then chopped the book up so he could put it in the 3-ring binder along with photos and other ideas and the script. And so everything was like one master book for the whole work. And obviously that was very successful. And then in the more modern times, we've got Octavia Butler, who is the creator of Afrofuturism, the genre in science fiction. Amazing writer. Um, And she came up from really not having very many opportunities, being Black, I think she was in the South. And yeah, she just kept copious different kinds of notebooks and different kinds of notes. She's a very interesting thinker. And then Ronald Reagan, famous orator and politician, of course, whether you like him or hate him, he's very influential and kept a commonplace book, apparently. So it's a lot of
Hmm.
people.
It's so interesting because I'm like having all of these images of either books that I've written or not written, read or been drawn to, or like one of them was I've always been drawn to recipe books that have stories within the book. Like the recipes are almost like an add-in, or maybe the recipe inspired the story or something. My kids had a book, I think it was called Everything on a Waffle. And there were recipes in it, but you've got these ongoing stories that are there. And as you're talking, I'm also thinking about like Thoreau probably also had sketches of nature or materials that were added in to kind of bring the story into being.
Yeah, probably, I would think, yes.
Yes. And so, and even others that there were probably um
And she definitely had sketches in his. Yeah,
definitely
the
to been,
sketches are allowed. Everything's allowed. So you can put sketches, you can put songs, you can put prayers, you could put
yeah,
recipes,
yeah.
whatever you want.
I feel like also this conversation, it's so funny because I know we're always talking about like geeking out on technology or different ways of doing it, but it brings out this whole creative spirit around um well, yesterday I went to see a film called Ezra, and it's about a couple who are divorced and they're trying to figure out how to co-parent their child who's 12 and has autism. And there's a lot of complexity to the story. But I've been thinking about different scenes all day. And I had some dreams about those scenes last night. And I know that at some point I will probably write either blog posts or put it in a book or something, how that different scenes really stirred me. And I feel like that is part of the path of the creative person that uh I know we were talking about I'm doing a talk for On Purpose Woman, and the creation of that is bringing in all of these different it is like I mean, I'm using the computer, but it is like a commonplace book because it has all of these different pieces. And I like to talk about this also because I've known people in my life who don't see themselves as writers, or maybe even see themselves as creative people necessarily, but they do write for their business in some way or another. And most people who are writing don't just sit down and write something. It's
Exactly.
like a process. You know, I've been sitting with this talk, or I've been sitting with the talk for weeks. Well, actually, you could say months because it's connected with something else. And so I've been thinking about this idea. And so bringing in all of these different pieces and then sitting with them, and feeling it deeply.
Mm.
The looking at the patterns, the asking how these different things weave together, the like I can't believe I had never heard of commonplace books. And I'm so like inspired by this um conversation and just looking at the potential of the creative process.
Yeah, I think it's so cool. I know I only heard about it in recent years as well, especially understanding it as something more complex than people just copying quotes down into a book because
Right.
it didn't seem that special at the time. And it's interesting how, as things advance, sometimes we drop off the things that were working We
Mhm.
just forget about, well, we don't need that anymore. We have computers now. But
Right.
I do think it's something that is useful, and we can even combine the technologies and have online versions or hybrid of online and book form, and anything that can be in a book can be in a computer. And so you can have a digital version. And I think that Wikipedia is basically kind of a version of commonplace
Right, 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 for
globally. And
sure.
that's actually where I got a lot of my starting information about commonplace books. I think it's a really good resource if anyone wants to go, because then you can click on the different writers and the sources about their commonplace book and kind of keep exploring. You can keep exploring. And yeah, so I think it's really cool. And um I've started keeping one, and I just am really enjoying the process. Again, I do use both digital, and I also recently started doing the physical as well, because I've kept journals for a long time, and then I found it limiting to have just a paper journal. So I started creating more of a digital collection of all of them, which I could call commonplace, one commonplace to put all of my journal entries into. And I got
Mhm,
really, really into that. But lately, I've been wanting to kind of focus in a little bit more on things that are going to inspire me and make me feel fired up and motivated to tackle my day.
mhm,
Um, and so I started to be printing out certain selections to put into a physical book. And I realized, oh, this is the commonplace. And I've been starting to add my notes and my thoughts about this thing and that thing. And it gives me like a physical item I can open up in the morning without distraction and just dive in to that. So that's kind of the pro of the physical, is we don't have as many distractions pulling on us, if you really want to like focus in.
mhm,
And then, of course, the old fashioned, like writing things by hand, is said to help us with memory.
mhm,
Like I said, I don't really like doing quotes, but even if I just write notes around a quote or underline a certain part or write what does this mean to me right now, whether you're doing it on a computer or paper is great, but I do think paper has been shown to be slightly better for memory.
mhm,
Um, but regardless, if you're doing, I think that extra level of not just putting quotes, but adding your notes to it is really really key, because whenever you're writing, you're thinking and you create like new connections. Like you don't always know what you're going to write before you write it. You just you just end up there, which is what I love about writing. So, yeah, so like you said, we might see the end result in a book form, but the person who wrote the book might have been doing this sort of process where they're finding sources of original thoughts, and then they're adding notes and thoughts on top of that, and they're making new connections, and then they're getting new ideas, and might go through that kind of thing a couple of times before the final result happens. And you don't see any of that when you just think, wow, they were just brilliant. But it's like,
uh-huh,
no, maybe they were doing all of this work behind the scenes that,
absolutely.
like, just working in a notebook, but
Mhm,
a particular kind of way of moving ideas, shuttling them back and forth between different notebooks, and having a dialogue with yourself about what they mean, um, is so interesting. So Tolstoy was, this famous Russian writer, and around 1905, he was older, and is the end of his life. And the last 15 years of his life, he only worked on this commonplace book and publishing a public version of it for people, because he felt like this could be his greatest contribution to the world. That ever like he was just thinking that beyond himself, there were so many great thinkers that not enough people were exposed to, that if they were exposed to it, it would like change all of their lives. And so he just thought this was the greatest contribution he could give to humanity, was to collect the best things from all of them into one book, and then one topic per day. You could then wander amongst the great thinkers of the time and be bettered for it. And so he said, I hope that readers of this book may experience the same benevolent and elevating feeling which I have experienced when I was working on its creation, and which I experience again and again when I reread it every day, working on the enlargement and improvement of the previous edition. So they did three editions, and he quoted all kinds of people, including Marcus Aurelius, Lao Tzu, Buddha, Pascal, Jesus, Muhammad, Confucius, Emerson, Kant, Seneca, Socrates, Thoreau, and all these people. And the only thing is that the Soviet government at the time did not appreciate all of the religious
uh-huh,
quotes. And so although it came out in, I think maybe it was the last version came out in 1912, it was not republished until 1995. So for like 80 years, it was unavailable because it was buried by the Soviet government. And so we just got it back in the 90s. And actually, that last final edition is not available in English at this time that I know of. Um, but you can get the second edition, and it's on Amazon, and anyone can get it. And but it was his life's work, I guess he would say, although he's not famous for it at all. Only the other fictional things. But he would, in his last version of it, it seemed like he turned so many of those quotes from those famous folks into fictional stories that kind of had that moral. And that
Uh-huh.
was just, and that's something Oscar Wilde did as well. There's another technique people would use to internalize the information and interpret it in a new way that then creates something original as well. So people did that kind of playing with ideas and stuff like that. But yeah, so the benefits of it are like just for memory. People originally they wanted to they were really big on memorization back in the day. You know, they would recite verbally passages and then writing it down was a way to do that. But there is something we found in studies called the generation effect that when you speak or you write something, you're more likely to remember it. And I think that's why adding notes is so much uh, is really good for memory as well. Adding your notes, adding your thoughts, because then you're adding something you've generated, and you're more likely to remember. Oh yeah, I remember I added that thing. So,
Mhm.
or even adding doodles. I mean, just generating something activates something with that creativity. And then you get new ideas. You can be creative, and I think that it's really inspiring because what you're doing is you're curating for yourself. You're deciding like this thing is less, if this is on a scale of 1 to 10 of how inspiring it is, maybe I'm not including the threes and the fours, but I'm only including everything six and above. So if you were to crack open this little book with all these inspiring things to you, you're guaranteed to be inspired because it's tailored for you. And yeah, I think that's so great. So whether people just copy and paste it into a document or you end up keeping it in a notebook, handwriting it, or printing some things out and sticking it in there, I think it's really, really cool. I've been really enjoying mine. I have this little ring bound notebook that I've been using lately.
Mhm.
And yeah, printed my notes for the today,
Uh-huh.
put them in there. And I just geek out on having a little notebook and adding a few pages every day. And I like having a backup of it on my computer. So that way I have that as well to access anytime. But for my morning routine, it's just nice to have my coffee or my tea and just look at this little book and not get distracted by everything going on in the world. Yeah, I just find it really satisfying and to kind of again engage in these process of like when you print something out, you can write your notes around it or on top of it. And there's just something special about that because it doesn't need to be orderly. You don't need to worry about it making sense to anybody else,
Mhm.
but at a later time, maybe if you have a talk or a book or something you're working on, maybe you look at those notes and you summarize them in the next thing that you do. And then it kind of iterates over time. And then maybe you print that out and that becomes the next thing to add to your archive and you'll improve on that next time. And so it's like a cycle. Again, whether you do it physically or digitally, just that movement of ideas and it's so inspiring to me.
It is. And I'm like have just so many ideas from listening to you around this and also noticing where there's resistance a little bit about a few things because I have one of the coaches who I work with always sends out a planner and it's very much a planner for a creative person and she encourages us to use the pieces that are meaningful to us and ignore the rest and all of that. But what I notice is that when I'm writing in it, a lot of times I will write on sticky notes
Mm,
and not write
yeah,
directly onto the planner. And then at the end of the month, I'll go back and maybe fill a few things in and then take the
yeah.
sticky notes off. But I'm like, I don't think of myself as Like, I mean, look around in my office, you'll know that I just have stuff everywhere, papers everywhere and things everywhere, lots of activity around me. And yet
Yeah.
there's some part of me that wants orderly and doesn't want so I realized part of it would be like the freedom to not have a plan,
That's cool.
you know? And and again, I love wandering. I love
Yeah.
ruminating about things. Like that's definitely part of my creative process. But there's a point where I'm wanting to bring things into form. And so because I have the computer, the cutting and pasting and all of that.
Right.
And I've thought about my grandfather was a writer, and I've thought about how he wrote on a manual typewriter. And he
Yeah.
would write his column from like beginning to end. And I'd be
Yeah.
like, oh my God, no. I'm
I
like,
know. What if you want to change it? Oh, goodness.
right,
Do it all over again.
I
Yeah.
know. And he'd be able to correct typos and
Yeah.
things, but there had to be this kind of linear uh thinking, planning it all out before you started writing.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know.
I know. That's one of the limitations I think with the traditional book style.
Uh-huh.
And there are people, so I've been very inspired by what other people are doing on YouTube. There's a big community of people talking about commonplace books and even showing their commonplace books to people.
Okay.
And some people have a very yeah, like rigid system and that it's going to be in the book and it's going to be there forever. Whereas
Uh-huh.
I'm kind of similar where I'm like, I want to be open to change and that kind of freaks me out. And I don't want that
Yeah.
rigidity of like, this is the final version. Cause I'm like, whoa, this is just the first version. I don't know
Right.
the final
Right.
version, but that's why I like a lot of things that are I either have my notebook that's like, this is my daily notebook, and I'm not taking that seriously.
Hmm.
And eventually, maybe that's going to end up in my digital archive, which is so open to change. Like you said, you can move things around digitally so
Right.
easily,
Right.
or make a copy of it and totally change the new one, and everything is safe, everything is captured. But there's the classic three ring binder, which we've had for a while. I
Right.
sometimes have gotten pinched on those. They're not my favorite, but I like the ring bound is kind of
Uh-huh.
basically the same, but they don't have the pinchy things. They
Hmm.
just pop right off of the
Oh yeah, yeah.
know?
Uh-huh.
So then that can be something I can interchange or even delete a page, replace a page,
Oh yeah.
order around. Like I really find that important to me, that
Uh-huh.
ability to reorder. And the other thing I really like are Midori notebooks,
Uh-huh.
or they're also called traveler's notebooks,
Yeah.
which is like a collection of little books inside of a wrapper. And you
Hmm.
can pull the little books out or you can replace them, reorder them, and things like that. So
I like that.
if I like these kind of things where it's like the option of like, if this was something you want to keep forever, you can keep it forever
Uh-huh.
and you don't have to just move on to the next notebook. But if you don't want this anymore, you can replace that section of this and then you can, have the best of both worlds. I really like that kind of versatility. Um, yeah, because I agree. I actually have a lot of problems with like any kind of workbook, like
Uh-huh.
you said, where it's like there's one page for this and it's like
Right.
page
Right.
and yeah, it does I like it better when I have maybe a do-over. So
Yeah,
I like your
I know
post-it.
there's something about, so I was like reflecting on that, like, this is part of my personality. Like, what is this about? But
Yeah.
actually, I like change,
Yeah.
and I'm going to change. And so change is part of it. So it's like,
Right.
how's it?
It's not something you necessarily need to overcome because it's like, yeah, something that you
Yeah,
like, that you want to, you have a value set.
right. And so it wasn't about perfection. It was about wanting to change it and not wanting to be like, oh, I can't even read what's there because I've crossed it out so many times. I want to be able to reflect on
Hmm.
that. The other thing that is really appealing to me though is that I keep seeing spirals as you're talking, and I'm thinking about, oh yeah, when you're handwriting things, you can write things in different ways that
True.
might not be as easy. I mean, I know there are ways to do it on the computer, but it's another level of
Yeah.
tech where this is just I like the playfulness of it.
Yeah.
I went to four films this month and I put the little ticket stub into each of my or into my journal and wrote about it there. So in a sense, that's kind of a commonplace
Yeah,
book page, of like
totally. Yeah,
there's
we're
my
probably already kind of doing it,
yeah,
in some
yeah.
fashion.
I like
And
it. I
it's
like it
just
as this conversation about a creative expression, like another creative expression, another art form.
definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely an art form. And it's and I like I said, there's some people who it's a little bit more official, like they're really thinking of it as like their personal encyclopedia and they're making entries into it. And I'm a little bit more like skittish, like this is a process. And
Yes.
but if I get into the headspace of it being the permanence, I think I'd never get there. Like I need to embrace the imperfection. So like the other day I was watching some YouTube video on commonplace books, but my head wasn't fully there. So I just
Mhm,
took some messy notes on a page and I can take that page out and toss it now that I have some
mhm.
notes that I've spent more time organizing to replace it. Or maybe I'll keep my messy note page just because it was like a moment in time that
Right.
I have a good feeling about that I want to remember. And it's what led that message page is what led to the organized page. I needed to have that allowed first.
Yeah.
So I think it's like, yeah, knowing yourself and kind of what is going to work for you. And yeah, it doesn't need to be, there's not one right way for everybody, for sure.
Mhm. Well, I love because one of the things we were talking about before the show started was an old-fashioned way of taking notes and learning, and how can we use them today and learning from past thinkers and what they did. And it is interesting to think that, how there's a few contemporary writers who use this style. And yeah, I have so I always write for 100 days in my incubator program. And I have right now a 500 word document of
Mhm.
quotes and ideas, and which is one of the reasons I came into the digital organization was like, okay, I can do some searching, but I'm losing something here. And how do I make it more efficient to actually pull the information out? So I am a collector of other people's thoughts and film scenes and things like that that really do inspire me with thinking. So I'm
Yeah.
inspired by
And you
this.
have so many of your own words too. I mean, at this point, you've
I
got
do. I do. Well,
a
yeah,
full library
I
of
do. I
experience.
do.
Yeah.
That was one of the rabbit holes I went down this morning, and I was like, oh, I forgot when I remember when I wrote for that organization, and I did that for a year. I've got at least 50 articles there. Where are those? And yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. And it's
it
like,
is.
sometimes you start, like, I know that you're a blogger. So,
Mhm.
at one point, the blog might be the commonplace book where everything ends up there. But then it's like the more stuff you have, it starts to overflow even that. And I think that's kind of
Right.
what happens. And that's why it's nice to have digital organization is kind of like the catch-all
Mhm.
because so many times the more that you enjoy the process of writing, the more you're gonna write, and that just overflows and overflows and overflows in a good way. But when you
Yes.
but it also can feel kind of overwhelming and like kind of be, like I said, like a difficult
Mhm.
place also to have so much stuff. And like, oh, I know I have something, or I know I could do more things, and I just need a new way to organize it out. So yeah, I do love Obsidian is the software I use for my commonplace, so
Mhm.
to speak. And it works like Wikipedia in that you can make little links to all of your other notes and stuff, which I think is the ideal because it would be like having a book where it would say go to page 50 and you wouldn't have to turn the page. You could just click
Mhm.
and go there. And it can mention a dozen different pages that you could go to. And everything is instantly available. You don't have to flip to the index to find something. It's definitely next level over just having a notebook in that quantity, one of the more quantity ways. But I don't think that the digital paper is completely without value either. Like I said, I love just being able to hold it in my hands and write some notes on it, highlight something very satisfying about highlighting. Um,
Yes.
yeah. But again, I know I can always print out another copy because I've got a digital backup. So it's nothing's ever permanent. And then I don't get freaked out. We were just talking also about how for me, one of my resistances has been like paper, like because I grew up really conserving paper and we only use the back of other things
Sure.
to print anything on when I grew up. So at first I started printing stuff on the backs of things, but then I realized, I really don't like the way it looks if I put it in a book and half of it is
Mhm.
trash. So gradually I've kind of started realizing like, I think this maybe is worthy of a full page back and forth and kind of reclaiming that ability to take up space,
Yeah.
because this is something I'm now referring back to daily for a couple weeks. So it's worth it. You know what I mean? But it's like those little things sometimes that, like you said, like, is it okay to have post-it or do I want to do a different system? Or is it okay to print this on an empty page or do I want to just use trash? I don't know. Try and find out and come to your own conclusion. Yeah, it's been very educational though, because it's like there's a lot of things that if I take a class, I liked it, but then, I moved on. But now I
Uh-huh.
can like pull out some of those things and either just have the quote for me to think about. And then maybe someday I reread it and I think, oh, I do want to go revisit that class. And then I'll go on a little side adventure to hunt out where one of those quotes originated and revisit it and take that deeper. So it kind of, it's it's just, yeah, like wandering in the garden of ideas and it can lead to little side adventures.
Wandering into the garden of ideas. I love that. Write that quote down. I
That
love.
is from Clueless, I will say.
Oh, is it? I love. Well, maybe that's why I felt familiar. I've watched
Yeah.
film many times, although it's been a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing I just wanted to say and just kind of shine a light on this for the listener is the idea that we're not necessarily just sitting down and writing something and that's it, but that there's a power in revisiting things that you know I mean, I would imagine a lot of us have quotes up on our walls from things. I'm looking down because I feel like I've taken some down recently and put them into journals.
Mm.
But things that were meaningful to us and being able to go back and revisit it. There was something that you said about someone creating a commonplace book and then taking some things from that book and rewriting it into another book. And that process, those things that we're drawn to, whether it's a scene from a film or a quote from a book or something that we wrote once and we revisit it, there's something really potent in that. There's something like I'm getting this feeling of being in a garden and turning the soil over and realizing the richness that's underneath that soil.
Mm.
That it does, I mean, for me as a creative person, I'm fascinated by things I can learn about myself and others, about new information that comes, or over time, something that I planted a seed about it coming into some level where it's like, oh, oh, I understand that in a way. And there's something really rich about then understanding yourself more or understanding the human condition more. I believe it's what grows empathy and compassion and understanding, what helps us continue to grow. And so the commonplace book, this conversation is bringing up the power of writing and seeing what stirs us and then going back and turning that soil and writing
Yeah.
down something that then gets stirred. And yeah, so thank you. This is so unexpected in terms of, I knew it was going to be an interesting conversation, but I just want to say to the listeners, see what got stirred for you in this. Because I think that most of the people who listen to this are people who are interested in creativity and writing and different things like
Yeah.
that. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
totally. And it's like it's kind of like stepping into the driver's seat, with the things that you consume, whether it's a TV show or something on the internet or a book or a podcast or whatever, if there's something that sparks you, you could think about like capturing it in some way, and maybe saying why, like it did that for you. Something I've done also, for instance, on Instagram, is I made a little area for me to save anything I see that relates to kind of inspiration and like where I want to be in the future. And I have that all in a little, um, it's not a playlist, but a little bookmarked area that I can go and specifically peruse everything that I've curated for myself, just cleaning the noise out. And what's
Yeah,
interesting too about some of the websites is when you do that, you actually train it to send you more good stuff like that.
cool.
So yeah, so that's just kind of like a small way somebody could start doing it. But yeah, just get creative and just put
Mhm.
in it. You're just putting it in a common place. You're just putting it in one spot. That's it.
I like that. I like that. Just it feels like part of a house.
Yeah. There's
And
also people used to call it gathering flowers,
ah, oh,
like
I
thought.
love it. Must be why I was so drawn to all the garden analogies there, gathering
Yeah,
flowers, like it felt like that. Yeah.
it does. Yeah. Yeah. So, but it's cool to know it's, it's part of this tradition and other people were not, that you can take an active role in being a reader or a listener, and that can be the first step of being a genius,
Mm-hmm.
like Virginia
Hmm.
Woolf and Oscar
Yeah.
Wilde, so many other greats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's Sophia Wren.
Oh, thank you. I
Mhm.
try.
Yeah. Yes, you do. So anything else? How do you want to wrap this up? Anything else that hasn't been said or that you want to repeat?
Yeah, I'll just say that I'm still on the journey. I'm still figuring things out, but I am always inspired by, what lights other people up. So I hope people will randomly come at me and say, "Hey, I heard that podcast and I started a commonplace book or something. And the other day I came upon this really cool quote, and this was the quote, and it's speaking to me right now." It would be fun to get into conversations like this. Or like today I flipped to this page and there was just to to let things be random, that like I
Mhm.
don't know. I feel like sometimes I think me and Andrea get into these great conversations where we speak about our random inspiration, but I love for that to just be more of a cultural trend of just like, hey, here's a random quote that I was pondering today. Like, I would love to have a conversation that centers around that rather than, I and to know that like you kind of did that for yourself. Like it might have been a podcast you listened to today, but maybe it was you turning the page of your commonplace book and that you had created 4 weeks ago, and you basically set that in front of yourself in the future. And you know what I mean? Like I would like us to be running on inspiration and treat it like our job to inspire ourselves.
I love it. Wander and see where it leads you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Sophia. And I encourage everyone to look at the show page description for links, ways to reach Sophia, and feel free to post in the comments because we will see things there also. Yeah.
Yeah. Be fun.
All right. So until we have a future conversation plan, this is it for today. But thanks so much, Sophia. And thank you
Yes,
for
thank
for
you so
listening.
much.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye bye now, everyone.